Thank you very much indeed, Danny, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's really a pleasure for me to be here. And to be honest with you, Danny insisted I should come, but it didn't take very much to convince me. So I'd like to say, if I might, just a few words about just really some thoughts more than anything else about how I view this whole, the community here, the education, State of Israel, the whole package really. And in that respect, basically, I would like to open by saying, welcome, Danny, thank you again. Kvod Harav Rafi Feuerstein, somebody who I have the greatest respect for. Dr. Miriam Mantz, Ron Weiser, Jeanette, close friends, Kvod Harav, and conference participants, really. You know, I'm a bureaucrat, and I'm a civil servant, and to be honest with you, I feel singularly ill-equipped to stand in front of you and talk about education, because what each and every one of you, as we say in Hebrew, what each and every one of you has forgotten about education, I will never learn. Long, long way for me to go. You know, I'm reminded of a story. I talk about education in this room, a story which was ascribed to an ex-Secretary of State of the United States. His name was Joseph Cisco. And he retired from his job, and the rest of his life he spent going around the world, especially in the United States, lecturing. And each time he would lecture on really the only thing he really knew, which was some 2 days of heavy rain in his hometown of, say, Wisconsin or something like that. And he spent his whole life making money about talking about the 2 days of heavy rain in Wisconsin. Anyway, what can happen? He was called back to his maker. Poor man passed away, went up to heaven. And in the entrance to heaven, Hashem said to him, listen, you're such a famous guy, we'd like you to talk in front of the audience here. And what would you like to talk about? And he said, listen, I've spent all my life talking about the 2 days of torrential rain in Wisconsin, can I make that speech? And he said to him, yes, there's no problem in you making that speech, but you should know that Noach is in the audience. Now, why do I say that? Because for me to talk about education in front of you, I feel a bit talking of some 2 days of rain in front of Noach. But actually, before I came, I asked our embassy for some, one of the girls who works at the embassy for some ideas. Maybe she can help me in thinking about it. She's not a Jewish girl. She's very bright, and she knows an enormous amount about Israel and the Jewish people. And she wrote to me, listen, say something, without you, we are incomplete. And you know something? Those words really stuck out in my mind, because I think that she has actually hit the nail on the head. And when I look at where we are right now in Israel, and I look at where the Jewish community is here in Australia, and I look at the intimate connection between us, the only conclusion I can come to, frankly, is that without you, we are incomplete. During the 70 years since Israel was founded, and despite all the trials and tribulations, threats, tragedy, conflict, I think there's no doubt whatsoever that Israel has built up a society, the envy of the entire international community. It has a standard of living well above the vast majority of the countries in the Western world, has growth rates exceeding that of almost all of Europe, has more Nobel Prize recipients per capita than any other nation in the world, and it is a superpower in the field of innovation, technology, high-tech and cyber. Why do I say all that? Because it has achieved all of those without any natural resources until recently, any natural resources whatsoever. It had one resource, and one resource alone, and that resource was the human resource. And that human resource in Israel is no different from the human resource anywhere else in the world, except for one crucial aspect. And that is the deep and real yearning of Israel, but the Jewish people the world over, certainly of Israelis, for education. The deep part and parcel that education is of our daily lives. Now, I know I'm not saying that new to any of you there, but it's a fact that one of the few countries in the world that has made it to the top of the international community in 70 years without a single piece of natural resource and only the human resource, can only do that if the young are educated. There is no other way. And I'm not just talking incidentally about formal education, although that as well, but also informal education, or the chugim, extracurricular activities, summer camps, the entire gamut of what constitutes educating the young. And I believe strongly that it is this, and perhaps nothing else, which has brought about our success as a nation state. But I also think it is this that will guarantee our future. And I think, too, that in many respects the situation is no different here in Australia. And I've said this many times before, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again. This community, the Jewish community in Australia, and I've been 36 years in the Foreign Service, and I've served in 7 countries, and I've been ambassador in 4. And I can tell you that this Jewish community is special. And you absolutely don't need to be a genius to see that. To see that year in and year out, the Jewish school system is the pinnacle of the education system here in Australia. And there's reasons for that. I'm sure that many of you have read the Gen 17, the Australian Jewish Community Survey. And it provides really fascinating insights into the success and uniqueness of the Jewish community here in Australia. For those of you who haven't read it, incidentally, I strongly recommend you do and study it. I read it in depth, I've studied it in depth, and I've spoken in depth to the author, especially Professor Andrew Marcus here in Melbourne. And the indications are clear. The fact that the Jewish schools in Australia are permanently at the top of the public schooling system, and the fact that the vast majority of Jewish households here send their children to Jewish schools or Jewish frameworks, are 2 of the major, if not the 2 major, contributing factors to the success of the community as a whole. Of course, it didn't happen in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum. We follow closely, everybody knows, of the resources put into the schooling system by the community institutions, by community funders. My first time here in Mount Scopus, but on the way in you see the Gandel school or whatever. Every school has its funder. The community is of great help. Nothing happens in a vacuum, but those resources would be worthless, or would be worth much less, if it didn't have the human factor involved. In other words, the educators themselves, frankly, you guys. And if the Australian Jewish community is considered the most Zionist of the Jewish communities around the globe, which it is, and if the younger generation is, according to the survey, and I again stress that you read it, at least as motivated towards Israel as their elders, it is because you here are inculcating them with the correct values. And then there is a third aspect. The aspect of the complete interaction, the interface between Israel and the Jews of diaspora. You know, yes, I can say it again and again, this is superfluous to say it here, that the home of the Jewish people, the ancestral home, etc., Israel, we know that. But as long as Jews live around the world, we're going to continue to need each other. We need each other first and foremost because you're not some sort of distant cousin. Israel and some distant cousins, we're brothers and we're sisters. It's quite simple. We need each other because, maybe not here in Australia, certainly not here in Australia, because Israel is, of course, a safe haven for Jews around the world. We're watching what's going on in the UK, we're watching what's going on in France, we're watching what's going on in many parts of the international community, and there's a lot of worry, and there's a lot of fear. But we need you, because not only does the community need Israel, but I think Israel is also in need of the communities around the world, including here in Australia, because at the bottom line is that you are our bedrock of support, because we are one people, as I said, one people and one nation. And Israel has always been, and always will be, the center of the yearning and the belief system of the Jews the world over. Does that mean that we have to agree on everything that's going on? Of course not. Does that mean that the Middle East isn't a source of thought, of controversy even? It is, and it should be, in our minds. I think it was Elie Wiesel who said he doesn't mind if somebody's in favor or if somebody is against, but the biggest enemy of all of us is indifference. And I think indifference, which might and creep into the community at one stage, is the biggest danger I think we face. I'm not asking for everybody to support this one or that one. I'm asking for a debate. I'm asking for openness. I'm asking that you care, and especially that you pass on to your students that they should care. And I think that that really is the bottom line. If I can come with a message to this wonderful group, a few hundred educators here in Melbourne, keep Israel on the top of your list of the things that you educate for. Make sure that the youngsters know what it's about. Make sure that the youngsters are involved. Make sure that the continuation of what happens here in Australia, that 91% of the Australian Jewish community has visited Israel. It's actually a figure which is in many respects mind-boggling, but it's a fact. Make sure that that continues. And make sure that the debate continues. We welcome it. But it's the worst of all, that we shouldn't be there. That somehow Israel will be in some sort of distant background. It has to be at the front of what you are teaching and what you're inculcating to your students. You know, I have a profession and I have an occupation. I work. I sort of get paid. I wouldn't call it really payment. I'm paid by the government. That's usually about 2 shekels a month. But you not only have an occupation, not only do you have a profession, but when I look at educators around the world and here, I think you have something additional, that you have a vocation, that you have a calling. It's more than just a job. And the responsibility that you have, frankly, knows no bounds in my eyes, because you are the ones that stand at the forefront of sharing the history, the culture, the roots, the language with the future generations. And it is you who ensure that our collective history is passed on to our children and kept alive. Because you are the ones who are fulfilling Vishinantam Bam, Levanecha v'dibarta bam. That is why I'm actually very proud to stand here today. That's why I did make the effort, and I'm very glad I did put everything aside and come here. That's why I'm actually humbled to a certain extent. And I have nothing but praise, really, for Danny, for the whole leadership of the Zionist Federation, for having this unique meeting. And that is why I can only urge you, and urge you, and urge you again to carry on with your work. And that is why, and I go full circle back to what the young girl said in the embassy, that is why without you, we frankly are incomplete. Thank you very much indeed.